We worked day and night on our new game. It wasn't that we were paid overtime. We were all salaried employees, and our contract stipulated that we had to work as many hours as necessary to release each game by the deadline. Within federal law, of course. Most of us, though, went the extra mile to please our bosses. The newest game we worked on was a horror game. We were working on a next-gen VR version that was well underway. The game was in its final stages. Only some glitches remained to be finalized. We were responsible for adapting it to VR for a major gaming company's virtual reality platform. Past versions of the game had been scary, but the version we were working on was supposed to give people a heart attack. I mean that literally, and I voiced my concerns to management. They thought about softening the game, but each time it got worse and worse. And by worse, I mean better, as that is what we were aiming for. The game was supposed to be terrifying, but it also knew how to draw you in, making you play again and again, as all great games do. Our head of development, Garrett, was a genius. He worked day and night, and compared to him, all of our other efforts looked insignificant. Sometimes I'd work on something for a week, show him, and he'd tell me he'd already done it himself, hours, days before. It could be infuriating. Besides, he was a bit of a weirdo. He had occult images and objects displayed everywhere in his office. He dressed like a middle-aged goth, black and white makeup, dark clothes, nail polish. He bragged about movies and videos of cult rituals he had found on the internet. Conversations with him always veered quickly into the macabre, and awkward silences occurred constantly. To call him eccentric would be an understatement, but he was also erudite, adept at coding, modeling, texturing, editing, scripting, animating, lighting, and compositing, a skill set rarely possessed by a single person. He cryptically told me that this game would be very special to him, and invited me into his office for a private demonstration of the finished product. He had done the coding himself and said he was very proud of the result. I was eager to see what he had accomplished, as he had spent the last week alone in his office, hardly sleeping at all. No one bothered him when he was in his work area. Judging by the pace of his work, I assumed he had made tremendous progress. I was a little apprehensive about what I was about to experience. We waited until the end of the workday. Sitting in his dimly lit office, I looked out the window and saw that the sun had begun to set, and it was getting darker outside. The streetlights lit up in the distance and my stomach rumbled. It looked like I'd be eating a late dinner again tonight. Garrett finally came back from whatever he was doing in the other room. I thought his eyes would look haggard after the lack of sleep he'd gotten over the last week, but they were intense and attentive. He looked manic, almost paranoid. He quickly brought the virtual reality headset over to me and tried to put it over my head without a word, eyes wide and staring into the void. I stopped him. "Hey, easy, I'll put it on now. What's wrong with you? You're acting weirder than usual." He looked like he came out of a trance and finally looked me in the eye. He paused, looked confused, like he'd forgotten where he was for a moment, then laughed awkwardly and said that he just really wanted me to try the new update. He said he trusted my judgment. I'd never fooled him when I thought something wasn't up to his standards, and he respected that. I put on the headset. It was a helmet that connected to the haptic suit I was wearing. The expensive suit made little jolts and shakes to make the VR experience more realistic. It wasn't painful, but if you were shot repeatedly with a gun, for example, it would cause discomfort. I heard an unfamiliar click as he adjusted the helmet and pulled it tighter around my head. A buzzing sound similar to the whirring of a dental drill was heard, and I felt a pinch in the back of my head, almost like a bee sting. "Ow, what was that?" I shouted to him. We didn't get off to a good start. It was really hurting. "Sorry, new equipment, haven't worked out the bugs yet," he mumbled. It hurt a lot, and the pain lingered there like a dull ache. It reminded me again of the dentist's drill and the pain afterward. "You turned off the tactile effects, didn't you?" I asked him. He had a tendency to forget that step, and his simulations always pushed the technology to the limit. I didn't want to go home bruised again, like after playing the martial arts fighting game he'd made me test last year. "Yeah, no worries," he said dismissively. I heard him quickly typing commands on his computer. An old wooden door suddenly appeared before my eyes. I opened the rusty latch and stepped inside. I brushed the cobwebs out of the way with my hands, feeling how softly they gave way as I ran my tactile gloves over them. They stuck to me as I walked forward, remaining sticky and nasty. Nice touch, I thought. As I walked forward, I saw that the dungeon was very dark, even near the entrance. How am I going to get a flashlight? I can't see. I got rid of it. Look at it. I think it's better. He told me what to do, and I performed a sequence of movements to get the match and light it. I saw it burn quickly, just like a real match. Really? I laughed. As if this game wasn't creepy enough, now I have a match I can see with. Let me guess, if I pull out a weapon, the lights go out, right? Of course, he said. You can't hold a lit match and pull out a knife at the same time. Where's the realism in that? It'll just go out. I went forward, holding the lighted match in my fingers. I raised my other hand, clamping the flame to block the draft. Darkness enveloped me, and I was afraid, stepping over every opening where something might be hiding, expecting to leap out of the shadows. The match was burning quite close to my fingertips by now, and I adjusted my grip to make room for the flame. I quietly descended the stairs and entered the dungeon. I couldn't help but marvel at the realism of the graphics. The supercomputer we were running on made the game look like real life, and my avatar's movements were smooth and seamless. The lighting and shadows were perfect, and I quickly forgot I was playing a game. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, the flame had reached the base of the match, burning my fingers, causing me to shriek in pain. I was suddenly enveloped in darkness. Hey kid, I told you to turn off the tactile effects, didn't you hear me? Sorry, I just did. Garrett didn't look too concerned. It was really hurting, and I told him he better turn the volume down. It would be too much for even the most hardened gamer. My fingers still stung, and it felt like he'd done some real damage. I sure hope so. I felt like he really burned my fingers. I lit another match, and the light flashed, revealing a tall, dead man looming over me. He was dressed in a tattered blue suit, his face falling apart, decomposing. Through the holes in his flesh, I could see muscle, exposed bone, and squirming maggots. I could smell his rotting flesh, but that was impossible, wasn't it? His mouth was open as he staggered toward me, saliva flowing from it. Shit, I screamed, jumping back. He was coming at me fast, and I felt my heart start to pound. It was just a game, but after what the match did to my finger, I was afraid of what it would feel like. I imagined the thing gnawing into my flesh and ripping open my stomach to feast on my insides, and once again I worried about the tactile settings. I kicked upward, and my foot should have hit the creature's jaw precisely, but it dodged at the last second with a slight head movement reminiscent of a professional boxer. It lunged at me with inhuman speed, arms outstretched, jagged claws stopping a few centimeters from my face. I grabbed the creature by the throat and struggled to hold it back. It snapped its teeth so close to my face that I could feel its horrible, stinking breath. But how was that possible? I poked the creature's eyes out with my thumbs and felt two satisfying pops that splattered my face with blood and intraocular fluid. How can I smell things in here? How the hell is that possible, Garrett? He hummed and simply said it was an upgrade he'd worked on. He asked how I liked it. It's disgusting, man. Like the tactile sensation, I get what you're getting at, but you cranked it up to 11. You need to turn the volume down. I can't take it anymore. I felt like I was being pushed to the limit, but despite the pain and discomfort, a smile still shone on my face. I was pouring sweat and feeling exhausted, and after all, I had only faced one bad guy. Everything around me stank. He told me I had to move on if I wanted to take my mind off of this and get deeper into the game. Walk a little further. I think you'll like what I've done with this place, he said in a quiet, monotone voice, typing new commands on the keyboard. There were flashlights here, so at least I didn't have to fight the darkness. I continued down into the dungeon and began killing the baby spiders by squeezing them between my fingers. There were thousands of them here, and they were crawling all over me, biting me with sharp little teeth. I crushed them as I walked, listening to their bodies crunch under my feet. Soon enough, I found myself in another large room filled with dim light and cobwebs. Oh shit, I thought. I've been killing spiders, and now here comes the mom. I spotted a knife on the floor and picked it up, glad I finally had a weapon. There was movement behind me, and I turned around and saw a huge black spider. It was the size of a grizzly bear and furry like a tarantula. Multiple red eyes glowed as it crept toward me on impossibly long legs. Dozens of smaller dog-sized spiders were coming at me from all sides. I threw my knife in the direction of the giant spider's eyes and managed to catch it off guard as it came at me. The spider lunged in my direction and knocked me down with a huge paw. As it did so, it made howling noises. Green blood spurted from the wound I inflicted. Where the green blood hit, it hissed and burned holes in the rocks like a low pH acid. The dog spiders attacked, their sharp teeth sinking into me as I kicked and screamed. I stabbed and swung my arms wildly, killing several of them and injuring others. The huge spider pounced on me again, gnashing its massive teeth and holding me down as I struggled as hard as I could. Its mandibles dug into my chest, and I felt heat spill down the front of my torso. The green spider blood that coated my arms began to sizzle and burn, and I screamed. But I wasn't screaming at Garrett anymore. I'd forgotten he was even there. I was trapped. I'd managed to kill the spiders, but their blood had done its work. My face was lumpy, and boils had formed on my arms and hands where the acid had burned my skin. My flesh was red and inflamed, and pus was already oozing out of several of the ruptured blisters. I was panting and covered in sweat. The light from the tunnel ahead beckoned me onward. My fatigue was secondary to what lay ahead. I kept walking, forgetting that anything had ever existed before. My life was a game, and the game was my life. There was nothing else. Another dim light showed up ahead. I walked forward and turned the corner, going deep into the cave. I needed to get to the lowest level of the dungeon, and something must be waiting for me there. What it was, I didn't know. The thought kept me on my toes and beckoned me forward. Every time I plunged into the darkness, a light appeared ahead, beckoning me forward. From time to time, I had to take out matches and strike them, and inevitably a creature would appear in the shadows nearby, ready to attack. I've killed countless zombies, vampires, ghouls, and giant spiders. I've been bitten by werewolves and caught by necromancers who put me on IVs and injected purple liquid into my veins, making me feel not quite human. Several times I broke down into bouts of panicked insanity, laughing, screaming, and grabbing my oddly shaped head. I couldn't understand how I ended up here in this dungeon of despair, when it became so difficult that I could bear it no longer, and there came such a breakdown. I found myself waking up without remembering how I had fallen asleep. I threw my head up in horror, wondering that I was still alive. I had no desire to eat or drink, and now I realized that Garrett had kept me alive with IVs, or maybe a feeding tube. I finally realized all of this after how long? Weeks, maybe a month. I'd been here so long that I'd explored to the extreme limits of Garrett's creation. I discovered a seam, a back door leading to this primitive workstation. I believe Garrett himself installed it here so that he could spend more time in his creation and still have access to the outside world. He probably assumed I'd never make it this far. When I first saw it, the laptop seemed so foreign to me that I recoiled from it fearfully. I wondered what the dungeon of despair had in store for me in this latest assault on my sanity. But then I remembered. It all came back to me as I glanced at the familiar screen. After screaming for a few minutes in a panicked fit of rage, I tried to pull the helmet off my head, but found that it hurt like hell to even try. The helmet was buckled tightly, and the more I struggled, the more I realized that it was actually implanted in the back of my skull. It felt like a long, thick needle had been implanted in my head. I wondered if this technology was affecting my memories, as well as my feelings. Thoughts about my life up to this point are hazy and hard to grasp. I'm afraid that if I spend much more time here, I'll never get out of here. I may never want to. The more I think about it, the more I can't remember anything. I can't remember why I started typing on this machine. There's a glimmer of light ahead. It came out of nothing. I have to see what's up there. Maybe it leads further into the dungeon. I'll take a quick look and then come back here.